Hi, my name's John Schroder. I trained as an international lawyer and started my career working in the refugee space, first with the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program throughout East Africa, and then with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in South Asia. I also worked at the State Department's Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, both in Washington, D.C. and abroad, primarily, again, in East Africa. After my time as an international civil servant, I transitioned into private sector advisory work, focusing on business ventures that have an international component. Most recently, I helped to start a clean energy company in my home state of Washington that also has offices in Japan and Europe. Thanks for inviting me to be. Question: how do you expect COVID-19 to impact international relations, especially in the developing world? And it's a good question. I don't think we know yet. A fairly broad prediction is that COVID will highlight the extent to which we are interdependent in ways we sort of knew but had not yet been made real for us. I grew up in a world of dramatically increasing global interdependence. Two of the big candidates there are global security and the global economy. The economy has been globalizing rapidly since I was your age, and September 11th highlighted for the policy community, and even more so the general public, how something happening on the other side of the planet could impact us here at home. So to the extent the virus continues to spread, it will probably gravitate toward the weakest link in our shared global system, and it'll stay there, continuing to threaten even the strongest link. So we're in this one together, and I think COVID is going to help us learn that lesson again in all kinds of ways. How would you advise a student who is interested in pursuing a career in the field of international relations? I do have advice. First, media consumption. So if you just drink from the media fire hose here in the U.S., you're not going to get much good visibility on what's happening in other parts of the world. The good news is you can manage your media consumption if you are mindful and intentional about what you spend your time reading or watching. You can really learn a lot. So take the time and expend the effort to get good at learning about international topics on your own. Second, biographies. Another big one related to the point about media. One of my favorite ways of learning about international topics is getting to know the people who did it well before me. There are great biographies and autobiographies in almost any discipline within international affairs that you're interested in. I started my career in humanitarian work, and I read the great biography of Sergio de Mello by Samantha Power. Sergio was the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Rick Barton, who is also doing a video for you, for your group, has a wonderful book called Peace Works about his time working on almost 30 over 30 armed conflicts around the world. It's a great way to get inside the head of these very experienced people. Another point, mentorship. It's a big one. There are so many good reasons to have mentors in almost anything you do in your professional life. It can literally make all the difference. It has in mine. As a culture, I think we spend a lot of time talking about leadership and comparatively so little time talking about mentorship. Russell Brand, the actor, has a great book on this topic. It's a quick and easy read. If you're planning to be a doctor or a lawyer, mentorship is really built into the profession. But in international affairs, it's often not. So my advice is to be very intentional about building your own personal board of directors and using them to help guide you. Another point, language. If you are not 100% operational in a language, as in if you can't actually have a detailed conversation and understand everything that's going on, it's not really much help when you're working abroad. So if you're going to learn a language, remember that that investment doesn't pay off until you reach fluency. English, Spanish, and French will continue to be big in the developing world. I made this point earlier. Finally, I think specialization. I encourage young people to specialize within the broader field of international studies early. So whether that's engineering and you're looking at how to support water and sanitation projects in the development sector, or if it's law and you're focused on the protection of rights, or microfinance or agriculture, it's a lot easier to develop these foundations when you're an undergrad than it is in grad school. There are a lot of reasons that it really pays to become an expert early in your career. You'll want to be curious as an undergrad and explore lots of topics. Just don't wait to develop a technical expertise or 2 or 3 because you're focused on sort of what's happening abroad. One great way to start cracking this, deciphering this, is to look at the job postings at international NGOs. You'll see they want some very specific things, and a degree in international development, while important and often a key part of that, often doesn't get you all the way there. Okay, question. Describe the most rewarding experience that you had when working with the United Nations across the globe. I had a lot of amazing experiences. I think probably my best memories relate to a feature of the work rather than any particular experience, and that had to do with my level of responsibility as a young UN officer. When I was in my 20s, I helped manage the largest organized refugee return in history. That was Afghan refugees returning home from Pakistan and Iran. That work was extremely rewarding, and sometimes it felt like we were a part of something historical. It's also true, especially in duty stations that are a little more difficult or austere, that you can develop a really deep camaraderie with your colleagues, and I continue to value many of those relationships that were formed during that time in my life. Question: do you think youth should look into a future in international relations, and why do you think that a career in that field could be beneficial? Great question. Absolutely. Since I'm speaking to a younger audience, one of the big trends you'll want to be mindful of, especially if we're using the very broad term international relations, is the professionalization of the international space. What I'm referring to is that a lot of universities will offer an undergraduate international relations degree, and while there is nothing wrong with doing one, I would also encourage you to consider developing a core competency in which you can excel even in a domestic context, whether that's law, finance, medicine, engineering, and so on. Unless you're going into one of the professions that is purely international relations, so essentially being a diplomat or an academic, you're going to find a lot more opportunity if you also have another core competency that interests you. That said, I can't recommend living and working abroad highly enough. It can be the setting for a really magnificent career and life.